announcements. His voice was calm, almost casual, but his words split the air with a finality I could feel in my bones. "Mom, maybe it's time you found your own place. My wife's mother will move in here." He didn't flinch when he said it. He didn't even look away. He stood straight, like someone repeating a decision already made long ago. I had been stirring a pot of soup, the same recipe his father Elijah loved, and the one I made nearly every Sunday for decades. The spoon slipped from my hand and clattered against the pot. Behind him, I heard Tessa's bright, sharp voice carrying from the living room. She was speaking to her mother Marjorie with that sing-song tone people use when they believe the world belongs to them. "This wall will come down," she said, her heels clicking against the wood floor. "It'll make the space so open." Marjorie's low laugh followed, syrupy and self-satisfied. "Yes, dear, and I'll finally have a proper room of my own." My hand pressed to the countertop to steady myself. This wasn't just a house. It was the place Elijah and I had chosen together when Damon was still small enough to ride on his father's shoulders. We spent long nights repairing shingles, sanding floors, planting the roses that still climbed across the fence in the back garden. 55 years of my life had been poured into these walls. And now I was being told it was no longer mine. I searched Damon's face for some flicker of hesitation, something that might show he understood what he was taking from me. But all I saw was resolve not born from cruelty, but from a kind of entitlement he had been allowed to grow into. My voice barely carried when I said, "I see." He shifted, mistaking my restraint for agreement. "It's for the best, Mom. You'll be happier somewhere, smaller, easier to manage." His words echoed in me as I stood motionless in the room that had once held birthday cakes, homework battles, and Sunday dinners. Then he turned away, leaving me with the sound of Tessa's laughter trailing behind him. I placed the spoon down, wiped my hands on the apron Elijah had given me, and walked slowly toward the dining room. There sat the oak table we had bought secondhand when Damon was a toddler. I could still picture him smearing jam across it, while Elijah laughed and tried to scold him. Now glossy magazines of sleek interiors covered its surface, white walls, chrome fixtures, hollow rooms that looked nothing like a home. Damon gestured toward them as though giving a presentation. "Mom, this house is in my name now. You'll be more comfortable somewhere smaller, less to clean, less to worry about." Marjorie leaned forward, pearls glinting against her neck, her eyes already roaming the room with ownership. "Don't worry, dear," she said sweetly. "I'll keep the place warm. It won't go unloved." I felt the shift then as surely as if she had shoved me from my chair. I smoothed the apron across my lap and remained silent. Words I knew would only feed them. Later, in the quiet of my bedroom, I listened as they spoke freely, certain I couldn't hear. "She needs a community of her own age," Tessa said briskly. "It isn't healthy for her to rattle around here alone." Marjorie hummed her agreement. "Yes, too fragile, too old. A retirement complex would be perfect." Their voices dripped with the satisfaction of people who had already won. But I was not fragile. That morning, I had jogged 2 miles through the park before giving a piano lesson to a neighbor's daughter. I balanced my own accounts, managed investments, and kept my mind sharp. What they wanted was not my comfort, but my house. To them, I was an obstacle to square footage and location. When Damon knocked on my door, later asking gently if I was all right, I opened it with a calm smile. 2 weeks should be enough, he said, like someone granting a kindness. My voice was steady when I answered. 2 weeks should be enough. Relief washed over his face, as though my agreement confirmed his righteousness. He didn't know silence could be a shield. That night, when the house had grown still, I pulled out Elijah's old leather address book. My fingers stopped at a familiar name. Richard Halberg, the attorney, who had guided Elijah through every contract and will. The phone rang only once before a steady voice answered Mrs. Calloway. "It's been a long time." The next afternoon, I sat in his office surrounded by shelves of legal volumes. Richard tapped a file and looked at me over his glasses. "Celine, your husband, was cautious. He placed everything in your name. The house may have been transferred to Damon for tax purposes, but make no mistake, the control remains yours." A warmth spread through me, not of anger, but of clarity. Damon thought he held the reins. Tessa and Marjorie believed they had erased me. But Elijah's foresight had left me standing where they least expected, still holding everything. I left Richard's office with a steadiness I hadn't felt in weeks. The weight that had pressed on my chest since Damon's announcement seemed lighter, almost bearable now. As I sat in the driveway staring at the house, I had once thought I might lose a thought took root. If Damon and his wife were so eager to claim what was mine, perhaps it was time I reminded them that nothing was truly theirs to begin with. The next morning, I picked up the phone again. This time, I dialed the number of Lena Ortiz, a realtor whose flyer had arrived in my mailbox last spring. Her voice was brisk, confident, the kind of tone that carried assurance even before a deal began. She arrived 2 days later, heels clicking across the porch Elijah had built with his own hands. I led her through each room quietly, while her sharp eyes swept across the space. "Celine," she said, pausing in the dining room where the oak table gleamed in the afternoon light. "This property is worth far more than most people guess. The location alone makes it gold, but the structure itself will spark a bidding war." Her certainty steadied me, and for the first time, I looked at my home not as a memory I was being pushed from, but as an asset, a key that could open a door I had long left locked. I walked her through the garden next the sun, falling across Elijah's roses. For a moment, I felt pride rather than grief. When she left that day, briefcase full and smile sharp, I had already signed the first papers. The process had begun. Meanwhile, Damon remained comfortable in his ignorance. He thought my quiet drives across town were visits to retirement communities. One evening over dinner, he asked casually if I'd found any places with good activities. "Not yet," I answered softly. Tessa smirked and suggested water aerobics, while Marjorie chuckled as though the image of me in a swimsuit was a private joke between them. I excused myself quickly, holding my silence like a weapon. But with Lena, I was deliberate. We discussed small repairs, staging ideas, a fresh coat of paint here, new curtains there. Her team moved quietly, careful not to draw attention. Each detail brought the sale closer, while Damon and his in-laws busied themselves with plans for furniture and renovations that would never be theirs. One evening, after Lena left with a stack of signed documents, I sat by my bedroom window and opened a wooden box Elijah had once kept beneath our bed. Inside were remnants of dreams we had set aside, brochures, postcards, even a folded map of Morocco, with edges yellowed by time. I traced my finger along the faded ink, remembering how we had once laughed over it in our 30s, too busy with Damon's schooling and Elijah's long hours to travel. One day, he had said, while we lay in the garden hammock, "We'll drink mint tea under desert skies. You'll wear those bright scarves you love, and I'll read to you until the lamps go out." At the time, I had only smiled. We thought there would always be time. But time ran out before the dream ever began. Now, with the house on the market and Elijah's careful planning at my back, I searched online for possibilities. Images filled my screen, ryads with painted doors, courtyards, laced with fountains, blue-tiled walls opening onto the sea. My heart caught on one listing in particular, an estate near the coast of Essaouira. White arches framed the ocean, olive trees grew in stone courtyards, and the price, though immense, was more than within reach with the assets Elijah had left and the sale Lena was preparing. For the first time, I didn't see a fantasy. I saw a door opening. The next days passed in a quiet rhythm. Damon and Tessa talked over dinner about tearing down walls, picking out flooring, planning how to brighten the living room. Marjorie declared absent-mindedly that she would take the master bedroom because the morning light suited her best. Damon glanced at me once, perhaps worried about my silence, but I only smiled and poured him more wine. My calm demeanor reassured him more than any words could. They mistook it for surrender. In truth, each meal I shared with them only steeled me further. Upstairs, tucked neatly in my desk drawer, were letters, already written notes to Richard confirming his guidance to Lena, approving her final steps, and one last folded page wrapped carefully around Elijah's map. Every evening after I cleared their plates and listened to their laughter fill the living room, I knew I was only a step away from freedom. When the last papers were signed and the sale confirmed, I planned one final gesture. I decided to cook a dinner they would remember not for the food itself, but for the calmness with which I served it. Roast chicken seasoned with rosemary from the garden potatoes, crisped golden in the oven bread, baked that morning so its crust cracked as the knife passed through. The good china came out polished until it shone. They ate heartily, laughter and chatter, tumbling over one another about curtains and flooring, certain the house was theirs. I nodded, I even laughed once or twice, while in my heart I pictured the sealed envelopes upstairs. Their certainty was almost sweet to watch. That night, as the dishes dried and the house fell quiet, I stood by the window of my bedroom. The roses swayed in the night breeze, and I whispered softly, "Elijah, the day you promised has come." The morning of my departure arrived quietly, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Pale light spilled across the dining room where I stood, running a cloth over the oak table one last time. Every mark on its surface told a story. Scratches from Damon's toy cars, faint rings from Elijah's coffee cups, the polish worn smooth where my hands had rested for years. I placed 2 envelopes on the wood, each written in my careful hand, one for Damon and the other for Tessa. I had written them late into the night. Damon's letter explained the truth, that the house he believed secured his future had already been sold. The deed transferred the transaction complete. He would come home to find that the power he thought was his had dissolved like mist. Tessa's letter was shorter, though equally clear. Whatever plans she and her mother had drawn up had never been theirs to begin with. Upstairs, my suitcases waited neatly stacked. I had packed only essentials, a few heirlooms, my journals, the quilt my mother had sewn for my wedding, Elijah's photograph in its worn frame. Everything else I left behind, not as a gift, but as empty shells stripped of the meaning they assumed belonged to them. I paused in the hallway, listening to the stillness. For the first time in weeks, the silence did not feel oppressive. It felt like freedom. I touched the edge of the table, then picked up my bags and walked out the front door, closing it softly behind me. A taxi idled at the curb, its trunk open. I slid inside, gave the driver the address of the airport, and didn't look back until the house had disappeared in the rear-view mirror. By the time I reached the ticket counter, the phone in my bag was already buzzing. Damon's name lit the screen, then Tessa's, then Damon again. I let it vibrate, muffled by the leather of my purse, and pushed it deeper out of reach. The agent handed me a boarding pass with a polite smile. Their voices could not reach me here. I imagined it, though, Damon walking into the dining room and noticing the envelopes. His brow furrowing as he slid a finger beneath the flap. Tessa leaning impatiently over his shoulder, hungry for confirmation of her victory. Then the silence, the kind that follows a blow no one sees coming. Damon's voice breaking as he read, "She sold it." Tessa's fury spilling over her sharp words aimed at him. "You told me it was ours. You've ruined everything." And Marjorie ever, the grand pretender clinging to denial. There must be a mistake. People like us don't get tossed out. This isn't how it works. But it was. Their imagined security had vanished with the sweep of my pen. As the plane lifted into the air hours later, I felt an odd calm. The land beneath me shrank until even the rivers and highways looked like threads on a map. For 55 years, I had poured myself into a house, a family, a son. I had endured their entitlement, their quiet erasure of me. And in the end, I had not screamed, nor begged, nor fought. I had simply walked away with everything that mattered still in my hands. The flight was long, but I hardly noticed. Elijah's photograph rested between the pages of my journal, and I kept one hand on it throughout the journey. When we landed, a chauffeur in a dark suit stood at the gate holding a placard with my name. His voice was warm as he greeted me and guided me into a car that carried the faint scent of jasmine. We drove through streets alive with color and movement. Whitewashed walls glimmered under the Sun Market stalls, spilled with fruit and spices. Children laughed as they darted between doorways. The air was thick with the scent of salt from the nearby sea. Beyond the bustle, the city gave way to quieter roads lined with palms. Then the car slowed, and I saw it, the estate from the photographs. Gates of wrought iron opened wide to reveal courtyards laced with fountains, mosaic tiles catching the light arches that rose against the sky like promises fulfilled. Inside, the air was cool and scented with orange blossoms. Every corner bore a mark of artistry, carved doors, painted ceilings, windows that opened to gardens alive with olive trees. It was not just a house. It was a world waiting for me. As dusk fell, I settled onto a terrace overlooking the sea. The horizon glowed violet, the desert winds carrying the faint scent of mint. A servant placed a glass of tea in my hands, steam curling upward. My phone buzzed again. Damon's name appeared, followed by message after message. "Mom, please call. We didn't mean it. Just come back. We'll fix this." I pressed delete one by one until the screen was silent. The quiet afterward felt like peace. The days that followed unfolded with a serenity I had almost forgotten was possible. Each morning, I woke to the sound of birds calling across the courtyard, their voices echoing against white stone walls. Sunlight filtered through carved shutters, casting patterns of light and shadow across the tiled floor. I would walk the garden paths with a cup of tea in hand, brushing my fingers across the rough bark of olive trees and breathing in the salt air drifting from the sea. In the afternoons, I explored the nearby town. Narrow streets opened into markets where vendors sold bright scarves, hammered silver, and baskets of figs. Children darted past me, their laughter mingling with the calls of merchants. Everywhere I turned, life moved with a rhythm both ancient and vibrant. It was nothing like the careful, controlled spaces Tessa had shown me in her glossy magazines. Here, everything breathed. Everything felt alive. At night, I often sat on the terrace with Elijah's photograph resting beside me. I would tell him aloud what I had seen that day, describing the mosaic fountains, the scent of spices, the hum of voices rising from the streets. I imagined him smiling at me the way he once had when we were younger, and everything felt possible. And for the first time in years, I felt as though I had stepped fully into the life we had once dreamed of, but never dared to claim. The calls and messages from Damon continued for several days, at first filled with anger, then with panic, and finally with pleas. "Mom, please answer. We made a mistake. Just come back. We'll fix it." I read them only once, then let them vanish into silence. Each word revealed more clearly what I had known all along, that their love for me had become entangled with possession, their concern for me twisted into convenience. They had never asked what I wanted. They only told me what they believed I should accept. But here, thousands of miles away, I discovered a truth I wished I had learned sooner. A person's worth cannot be measured in the space they are allowed to occupy in someone else's house or heart. My worth was in the years I had lived, the memories I carried, the dreams I still had yet to chase. Damon could no longer diminish that. Neither could Tessa or Marjorie. One evening, I walked down to the shoreline just beyond the estate. The waves lapped gently at the sand, and the air smelled of salt and earth. I carried with me the old map Elijah had folded decades ago, its paper now soft and fragile from time. Kneeling, I pressed it to the sand, letting the breeze ruffle its corners. "We made it, Elijah," I whispered. "It took longer than we planned, but we made it." Tears blurred the horizon, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of release, of knowing that despite everything taken from me, the best part of Elijah's promise still lived on. I stayed there until the stars spilled across the sky and the waves shimmered silver in the moonlight. In the days that followed, I began shaping a new rhythm for myself. I hired a tutor to help me improve my French and Arabic so I could speak more easily with neighbors. I joined a local group of women who met weekly in a courtyard to share meals, weaving stories together as freely as they passed plates of food. Slowly, the life that had once felt stolen from me began to grow again, not as a continuation of what I had lost, but as something entirely new. There were still moments of ache. Sometimes I would catch myself setting the table for two, expecting Elijah to appear. Other times, I thought of Damon, the little boy he once was, clinging to his father's shoulders, laughing with the joy so pure it seemed impossible he could grow into the man who had dismissed me. Yet even those memories softened in this place. They no longer bound me in sorrow. They reminded me of the strength it had taken to survive them. The last time I checked my phone, there were dozens of unread messages. Some angry, some pleading, some confused. I scrolled through them slowly, then pressed delete until the screen was clear. A strange peace settled over me, final and full. The house they had fought to claim was gone. The control they had believed unshakable had vanished. And I was no longer defined by their choices. As I set the phone aside, I poured myself another cup of mint tea and stepped out onto the terrace. The evening air carried the scent of jasmine, the sea stretching endlessly before me. I lifted Elijah's photograph, touched the frame, and let a smile rise. They told me to find my own place, and I had. So often in life, people will try to write your story for you, to convince you that your time, your worth, your dreams are finished. But as I stood there beneath the violet sky, I knew the truth. It is never too late to take back the pen. It is never too late to begin again. If you felt moved by this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. And I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What does starting over mean to you?